Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Mikkipedia, and this week on the podcast I speak to Dr. Scott Lear, Professor at Simon Fraser University, on mental health, lifestyle strategies, and speaking out in order to help foster awareness and acceptance amongst those around you. Dr. Lear has been a professor for over 20 years looking at lifestyle, obesity, heart disease risk, because he is also at risk of heart disease, although we don't really go into that in our conversation. He's got a lot of information on his blog about it. Today, though, we talk more about Scott's own journey with depression and mental health, of which he's been very open about since being diagnosed a few years earlier. And this occurred after feeling down for no good reason, as he puts it. So we discuss the stigma that is attached to mental health diagnosis, which can prevent people from getting help earlier. And of course, talking about it. We talk about the strategies that he employed, both professional and personal, to help recover from it, but also how important it was for him to receive actual treatment, even though he was doing a lot of what is recommended that we do to help our mental health, like exercise and diet, etc. We also talk about those strategies for him and how that certainly helped him along the way. And finally, we talk about how his own experience has now sort of led him to be interested from a research perspective into the field of sort of mental health and lifestyle. So it's a really interesting and thought-provoking conversation, I think in part because it comes from that personal experience. And so Scott is able to put his own lens on it from a person sort of going through it, but also look at it from that sort of researcher perspective, because he's such a wealth of information over things related to sort of health and lifestyle. So Dr. Scott Lear is a professor in the Faculty of the Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University and holds the Pfizer Heart and Stroke Foundation Chair in Cardiovascular Prevention Research at St. Paul's Hospital. He is also a member of the Division of Cardiology at Providence Healthcare. And over the past 20 years, he's been conducting research in the prevention and management of heart disease, focusing on supporting healthy lifestyles and improving access to timely health care. In addition to publishing over 160 research papers, his work has been featured in various media outlets, including the Vancouver Sun, The Conversation, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, City TV, and Global News. Scott also has an active blog and regularly podcasts on issues pertaining to health, including heart health, mental health, and so forth. And we've included links to both his professional profile at Simon Fraser University and his blog also. Before we crack on to this really thought-provoking conversation, just a reminder that the best way to support the podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of the podcast out there and amongst the literally thousands of other podcasts, so more people get the opportunity to learn from the guests that I have on the show. So enjoy this conversation I have with Dr. Scott Lear. Yeah. Okay. So Scott, thank you so much for taking time with me in your afternoon to chat about subjects that we're both really obviously quite passionate about: mental health, physical activity, sedentary behaviour. These are things which I see you tweet about, and I've read your work and listened to your podcast. So I'm really pleased to have this opportunity. I'm really always interested in people's sort of origin story is not the right word, but how you sort of developed this interest in this field.
Okay. Well, origin story sounds cool because it sounds like I'm a superhero.
That's true, actually.
Yeah. Well, I started getting interested in physical activity in the middle of high school. And as I started getting into the end of high school, thought that I'd like to get into medical research. And I didn't have anything specific, but then in university, I started getting more and more interested in the heart, partly because it was just a personal interest. I'd studied kinesiology in university, and at that time, I was focused on getting into medical school, and I tried once and didn't get in. So then I applied for graduate school, which is what most people do to try and increase their odds of getting into med school. And I actually became quite happy with what I was doing. I was working with clinicians in cardiac rehabilitation. So that was really exciting for me regarding physical activity, exercise, and lifestyle behaviors, how it can be used as a treatment for heart disease. At the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, what can we do to prevent this as well? And that's where the prevention and interest in getting people to be active. From a health point of view, it's you want to get people, whether it's healthy nutrition, proper sleep, taking their medications, or physical activity, you want, like, ideally everybody to be doing this. And I bring that up because it's in contrast to when I talk to people in the fitness industry. They say, well, the people we see have no problem exercising. And that's because they're volunteering. They're the ones coming to the fitness studio. They're the ones who are paying for your services. Whereas in health, it's usually the people that are actually the hardest to reach that might benefit the most from changing their health behaviors.
Yeah, it's typically the case, isn't it? Like, my research background is public health and nutrition and physical activity as well, although I'm a nutritionist sort of by trade was my background with physical education as well. But it's we often have people in our field have quite a skewed perception potentially without that broader look over at public health. We have a skewed perception of what people are interested in. Like, for example, I could think, everyone's interested in eating a whole foods diet and trying to get 7 hours sleep and knowing that devices, like these things which we think should be common knowledge, actually, for the vast majority of people, it's just not how this is not stuff that they're either been exposed to or have the opportunity to take up in their everyday life, I think.
For sure. And if you don't have access to those healthy foods, or if you don't feel safe going for a walk in your neighborhood, these are going to be barriers that are beyond your control.
So, Scott, before we chat about your research in this field, can we have a chat about just your own personal journey? Like, I mentioned that obviously that there's a real strong link between physical activity and health and mental health, and I think people are much more aware of that now than probably what they would have been in the past, although maybe actually they're not, and I just think that they are because these are the people that I talk to. But as I understand, and you've written about your own sort of personal experience in this area, are you happy to just have a bit of a chat about that?
Yeah, for sure. So physical activity is, I would say I was a late bloomer in terms of exercise. It wasn't until probably I was 15 or 16 I started getting interested in tennis, and then started running and doing triathlons at that time. I wasn't a child who was put into soccer, football, hockey, or swimming at the age of 5, and did it for 7 or 10 years. And once you've done it at that age, you kind of always remember it. So I would say I was a late bloomer, and it's always been something for me that I would say I can count on, and also be an anchor. So if whether I'm stressed or whatever else is going on in my life, I would still have that exercise. Some of my best workouts would be when I'm got so much like adrenaline going from maybe lack of sleep from stress, and then just going and working out, and I'll be like, wow, I had a good workout there and feeling better. And it was let's see, it was in 2021 when, I didn't self-diagnose myself as having depression. My family doctor did that. But looking back, and even then, I could tell I wasn't like feeling great. And I would just tell myself two things, which I think I overuse these mantras. One, it's okay to not be okay, but I was using that every single day. And so I think, that's wasn't beneficial. And then I was naive or ignorant at the time, thinking, well, it's just affecting me. Like, yes, I'm not feeling great, but I'm not affecting anybody else. But that's untrue. If your people in your household are affected by that, whether they can sense the tension or whether it's displayed in behaviors or things you say. And so looking back at it, and I liken it to even like heart disease and most diseases, where by the time it's diagnosed, the disease process has already been ongoing for years or decades. Like when somebody has a heart attack, that's not the start of the disease. They probably started having that disease process 15, 20 years ago, per se. And it's just the heart attack for them is unfortunately the first symptoms that they've recognized. And the same thing with people who have mental illness, and trying to recognize that, and then trying to understand if it's like, quote, all in your head. And at the same time, I would think to myself, look, I've got a great family, I've got a house, got a great job. I should just suck it up. And I'm sure I don't, maybe I'm not really unhappy given that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it, and I think this is a challenge that I imagine many people in your situation would have, is there's no sort of overt reason for feeling the way that you feel. And I understand that. So it's just like, like suck it up, or you're doing your hard workouts, you're feeling great in that moment or whatever, and surely you can ride it out, I suppose, is something that I hear a bit from others similar to you, actually.
Yeah, and I would say, as probably with a lot of people, the pandemic probably just took it up a notch. My favorite, or my go-to mode for exercising and training is swimming. So for a long time, swimming pools were closed. When it got to early summer, I would put on my wetsuit and go swim at the beach for that summer, and so that was good. And then when the pools started open, they were restricted into how many people could go. Same with the fitness centers, you had to book. And that actually became a stressful process.
Yes.
So I usually did drop in. I would show half an hour early so I'd get a spot, because usually within 5 minutes of being able to book online, that session was filled.
Oh my goodness.
And you would have to, like, it was open during the workday, so you'd have to make sure there's no work for you to do around that period, because if you got a phone call, you either decide, oh, I'm not going to take that work phone call, book my swimming, which kind of thinks I drive my priorities straight.
Yes.
Or take the work phone call and then go to book, and you've missed the session. And so something that was a pleasure started to become stressful. So I would say, while I was still doing it religiously, and it wasn't as, I should say, as great of a release or enjoyment as it was before.
Yeah. And was it at that time that you decided to seek just another opinion on how you were feeling? Like, how did that sort of come to the point where you're like, actually, I've really got to speak to someone about this?
Yeah, that was, yeah, I don't know anybody who had a mental illness or had mental illness that had that kind of awareness. There's usually like some sort of either acute event or like with among whether the household or somebody close to a person saying, look, this is just too much, right? Something's got to change.
Yeah.
And that was the case with me. And then it's like, oh, okay. Then I started to seek help.
Yeah. Yeah. And how long, Scott, did it take to actually begin to feel better?
Um, so I imagine our public healthcare systems are quite similar, both in their benefits and also in their problems and challenges. So after seeing the family physician, I started looking into I looking for something more intensive. So I looked at what the public healthcare system offered in terms of whether it's community care or inpatient care. Uh, I was hearing waits to see a psychiatrist could be up to a couple of years. The inpatient facilities that are available are seem to be only reserved for the worst of the worst because they have limited beds. And as one person referred to them as just treat them and street them. So you go in, for most people, they might stay 5 to 10 days. Once they're believed to not be harm to themselves or anybody else, then they're released, but there's no community care. So I'm privileged in my work position I have, my employment, the salary that I have, that I looked into a private inpatient treatment facility. And unfortunately, both my family physician and a friend who's clinical psychologist independently said, if you can afford it, I recommend that to all my patients because you're not going to get help in the public healthcare system for something like this.
Oh, amazing. So that was the route that you took. What did that entail?
So I was there for 7 weeks. Most people are there 6 to 8 weeks, and this place was quite nice, but it was still because it was, as one person described it, it was a 4-star prison, and part of that was because this was also during the pandemic, so we weren't allowed visitors, which they're allowed now. There were no off-site field trips, which was common before the pandemic and stuff. But it was still very valuable. This place was actually a former hotel, so the building and facilities were quite nice. They were on a few acres of land with forest surroundings, so there were trails, and so that I would usually go out for a walk on the trail every lunchtime. And there was also a recreational therapist and a gym. And I started playing a game which is quite popular in the US and Canada called pickleball.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
and and I still continue to play that. But I was in the gym exercising. There was treatment, there were lectures and stuff, and it was very helpful for me. It was expensive, but a lot of people spend more money on their cars, and I can't imagine their cars giving them as much life benefit as going through the program I went through.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Scott, did you feel apprehensive about informing your work or telling people close to you that you were doing this? I'm always, yeah, because there is a bit of, or it appears, there is still some stigma attached to,
Yeah.
mental illness, I guess.
Oh, most definitely. So my work was very supportive. And so I took a 4-month medical leave, and I was told quite a number of people before what was going, like close friends and close families. But I do know, like, one of the sessions that we had in this inpatient facility was on what happens after. And some people were saying that they only told 2 people before they came in. So they were worried about how do they explain this 8-week disappearance from the face of the earth when they come back. Others were unemployed, and they're because of they either took leave or quit their job, and wondering, how do I explain I've taken a year off? Because if I tell them I've had a mental illness, they know that some people aren't going to get hired. Where if they said, oh, they were treated for cancer and it's in remission, that's probably not going to play a big role into deciding whether to hire somebody or not. With me, I found, and this is not for everybody, but I found, I guess, power in controlling my story instead of waiting for people to kind of fill in the blanks. And so I became very vocal about it. And I was aware of the stigma, but I was just like, you know what? If I go out there and just tell people what's happening, or, not disclosing too many personal things, but at least forming my story, then I get out ahead of that stigma. And I'm transparent and going forward. But as I said, I might not have done that if I didn't have an employer that was supportive and understanding.
Yeah, for sure. And someone in your position where you are a leader, if you like, in terms of, if I think about because you're a professor, right? So you teach, and you've got these sort of younger people who are coming through, learning from you. Like, I imagine that and also, of course, younger colleagues. I'm not suggesting you're old, but just as for someone like you to be transparent about that's the stuff that you need to help break down that stigma, in my eyes.
Yeah, and I've been, like, a lot of times when I write about it or share it, I'm doing it for me. Like, I enjoy writing, and so this is something that's helpful for me, and if it helps with others. But I've got lots of feedback when I've written commentaries in newspaper, people reaching out to me. I dare to read the comment section sometimes, and they're all actually quite supportive. And I've realized that when one person opens up, it gives permission to others to open up as well. And I've got feedback from actually the people that you said, like, it's not my purpose, but my dean had mentioned a few months ago that some of our junior colleagues were saying that they felt very supported by reading and me sharing what I was going through. And while academics can be a job that a lot of people say is a dream job, there's a lot of not so dreaming or maybe nightmarish stuff that happen. Since I'm in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University, I teach on health. So I have, even before I went through and was diagnosed with depression, I was diagnosed with some heart condition, and I would bring that into my class. And the students liked it. There's one thing having that knowledge and research,
Yeah.
credibility, but then it just, as soon as you've like experienced it, then that your credibility goes up. And so students enjoyed, like, I had a videotape of my exercise stress test that I did, and I show it to them in the class. And because I'm teaching how do we diagnose heart disease, so I show them me running on the treadmill till exhaustion. And yeah.
Yeah. And Scott, did you, when you were in the facility, because obviously you're a knowledgeable guy in health and fitness and nutrition, in the whole sort of space. Were you surprised by any of the things that you learned in the facility that were going to be helpful for you?
Yeah, there was definitely like one big surprise. I would say I'm in the health behaviors research expertise, because getting people to be active, I wouldn't say I'm an exercise physiologist. Like, I understand exercise physiology, but I'm not in a lab measuring people while they're doing strength training or fitness testing. I'm trying to get people to be active, trying to see how that behavior relates to health. So I knew about various behavioral therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy. But what I didn't know is something called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And I'm not saying that I didn't know it because this is some type of fringe thing. This is not. It's part of a clinical psychologist's tools of behavioral therapy, and that worked very well. It's based on, well, cognitive behavior therapy is the end goal because that works on changing your thoughts. Dialectical behavior therapy recognizes that changing your thoughts is a long process. So it starts to look at changing your behavior, because you can still have your thoughts, but change your behavior. And so that worked very well for me. And some of it, so for some examples, simple examples of this is that you're in a heated argument. And when you're in a heated argument, you're seeing red. You're not thinking like, oh, I'll just use these behavioral therapies. This just says, okay, these are simple things that you can do. Like, one, remove yourself from the situation. Another is, that works for people, putting like an ice pack on the back of your neck.
Yes.
And all of these types of things are meant to not make the situation worse. They're not meant to change your thoughts. They're not meant to get you to a place where you can, win the argument or start talking. It's that you just don't want to make things worse. You're in terms of your emotional activation, you're like an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. So a lot of these more calming strategies of, oh, just sit down and do some mindfulness, it's not going to happen. So when you're like that, it's about not making the situation worse. And then there can be time either before or after to look at things. For example, a lot of times when we get into those situations, you can look backwards and see, oh yeah, okay, this action, or I was mad when I came home, or because something happened at work, and then I was driving home, somebody cut me off. Maybe before I engaged with the household, I go have 10 minutes of mindfulness. So that and so some of these things, it's like a cumulative, like add on to each other, and it's not necessarily the situation that you're in that's super intense that is the cause of it, but these other things. And then there's also an aspect which is called increasing your window of tolerance, and realizing that stress is always going to happen, and how are you going to manage that? And so things that you've talked about already, like good quality sleep. If you've had 3, 5, or 6 hours of sleep, that person cutting you off, whether they're in the right or wrong, is probably maybe going to spark something a bit more than if you've had you're well rested, just like regular physical activity. And so those are, and if some people benefit from spending time alone, or doing self-care, reading a book, or doing some meditation or yoga. And for those people who are doing those things, they can probably picture, if they stop doing them, how their day might be a bit more on edge.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's a little bit like I'm thinking about exercise in that last example as well. Like, I know I feel different whether I'm out for a run in the morning or I have a rest day, for example. It actually changes how my body and my mind feel. Like, I just feel slightly more on edge, and see, I think like I've got this pent up energy that I need to expend. Scott, have you read Dr. Peter Attia's book, Outlive?
No, I haven't.
You know who I'm talking about, though?
Yes.
Yeah, and so he talks in there a little bit. I don't know if it's the same thing, the dialectical behavioral therapy. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he is very transparent about his own sort of challenges with a work addiction and how he viewed himself. And part of his therapy was whenever he had, because his major anger issue was actually at himself and his own behavior, and he would treat himself quite poorly. So one of his techniques that his therapist got him to do was to speak to himself, and he had to do a voice memo to her every time he had these thoughts of, oh, you're a loser or whatever. He had to voice memo himself, speaking kindly, speaking to himself like he was speaking to his son or his best friend, or someone he really cared about. So over time, even though he was having these thoughts, the idea of he was saying these other things out loud helped change his perspective on that situation, which is similar but sort of different to how you're describing it, but that whole being led by an action rather than trying to necessarily change that thought pattern.
Yeah, and what you just described is something too that was part of what we discussed, and for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, getting caught in traffic was something that would raise my emotional temperature, and so there's an aspect within this therapy of radical acceptance. You're not going to be able to change the traffic, and it's trying to focus on how to change how you react, and it's just like saying some of those thoughts in your head, or taking a posture. Part of it is even doing a half smile. When we smile, it actually affects us physiologically in a positive way. And so some of the things that you mentioned, that Peter Attia mentioned, is exactly that. And we're our most awful critics to ourselves.
Yeah.
We treat ourselves so poorly that in no way would we ever treat somebody around us the same way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do a lot of work with people in the nutrition space and the fat loss space, and what I recognize from very early on that most people need is actually sort of coaching in that aspect, like in a way to think about, when they quote unquote sort of fall off the bandwagon, so to speak, or they deviate from the planned meal and they eat pizza or whatever. And then the comments that they make to themselves about themselves afterwards in, the Facebook group and stuff, it's clearly evident of how the thought process that is going on, like, oh, I can't do anything, I'm a loser, I'm a fat pig. Like, these are things which people write about themselves, and it's almost, so I think some people must almost be unconscious to just how this then changes what they do next. It's almost like default sort of thought patterns that if you were to say to some people, that's actually super unhelpful for you, like they might not even register just the effect that it is having because it's so ingrained and it's so deep.
Yeah, and a common one that I would think, and it's quite common when I've talked with others, is this thought that I don't deserve to be happy.
Yeah.
And which, is untrue.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And I think if it's, we have these chats as well, is that if that's the way, if that's the way that you're thinking, then this is then changing how you respond, and which is exactly what you say, and it changes how you then behave. You sort of like, you set yourself up to sort of behave in a certain way, the way that you're sort of trying to get away from, I think. Changing that physical state is interesting, and I've heard people talk about that before, like the ice pack on the back of the neck. This is often people talk about it in that moment of, again, nutrition related, but stress eating, like something has happened, and your first response is to want to pull out the ice cream container or grab that big packet of crisps, and instead you change your physical state, and that actually can help almost put the stop button on that behavior.
Yeah, definitely. And it's has physiological basis, like it's either on the back of the neck or your forehead. Like, I've tried it, like holding an ice pack isn't the same as doing it close to your head, and it actually is calming. Others if you don't have an ice pack, try and throw cold water on your face.
Yeah. Jump in a cold lake. Slightly, I mean, that's slightly less convenient, but would also probably do it. Now, are you a fan of sauna or cold water therapy as part of your own sort of like everyday well-being, just out of interest?
I wouldn't say it is. After I swim, I'll go sit in the hot tub.
Nice.
And relax and do a bit of stretching. And I do it because I find it relaxing. And I also, for me, a lot of times before, I would finish my swim and then rush out of there and go to work. So just having that, I think the benefit for me is giving myself permission to slow down.
Yeah.
And have, like, after the exercise, have 5-10 minutes and before getting on with the rest of the day.
Yeah. I think you're a parent, Scott?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel parents even more so than probably non-parents, and I'm a step parent, so I'm a parent removed, if you like. But like, so much of what you do is not necessarily for yourself, like you're at work as an employee, you're helping your students, then you're at home and you're a dad and you're a husband and you're doing all these things, and people forget to take some extra time for themselves to then be able to go into those other situations in their best possible way that they can, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And when I was in the treatment facility, there's maybe around 40 people on average. It was a rolling intake and discharge. Most of the people there were people that you described, whether it was at their job or at their households. They were ones who were giving so much of themselves to others that they made no space for themselves. And then it just became so burdensome for them. They're not getting their needs met. And it doesn't mean them getting their needs met means override somebody else's, but they haven't had space to get their needs met, and it can create that depressive, low self-worth type of mentality.
Scott, have you had to change anything in everyday life to help with your mental health? Like, because I mean, you already sort of exercise. I mean, we did just talk about that additional time you spend after exercise, but anything else that you do now as part of your everyday just well-being that you might not have done?
In terms of activities, I was more so earlier on than now, but I would probably spend about 10 minutes, maybe 3 to 4 times a week, doing some mindfulness meditation. And I'll turn to that if I'm feeling stressed. And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm stressed, I got to meditate. Which is it's not necessarily, because I find it works best when I actually wind down a bit before I start doing that. But 10, 15 minutes is the time it takes. I make sure that I have, even if I'm not doing it, have mental breaks throughout the day, recognizing, because one of the things in this, you touched on it in the book that you mentioned, Peter Tia wrote. One of the things I thought when I wasn't feeling happy, I thought, is I just have to work more. I just have to be more productive. And it sounds silly now, like nobody felt better by working more. But that
It's so true.
but that's what I thought at the time. And now I have a different outlook, in that the brain is no the brain's not a muscle, but it's no different than a muscle that if you work it all day, it's just going to collapse. And so so some of the things that over the past 18 months, that I'm not sure if it's daily activities, but it's a change in outlook that is, for me, is not to push so hard, realize that you can only do so much in a day, and you need to take, it can sound selfish at first, but it's exactly right, that you need to take care of yourself, otherwise you're of help to nobody.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you say that about work, because I used to be a lecturer at a couple of different institutes, and the first one that I was at, we were away at a work retreat, and I was chatting to a professor and an associate professor. So in New Zealand, it's like lecturer, senior lecturer, then a couple of different grades, and then professors obviously top notch. I don't know how it is in Canada, but they were saying that, if you want to be successful in academia, you have to just expect to work nights and weekends. That's just the way it is, and so it's funny you mentioned earlier on that people assume that being an academic is like this dream life, but there's real pressure put on academics to continue to be productive and put out works and come up with research studies and do the publications, mentor people through. And I think it was at that time that I had in my head, this isn't going to be a long-term gig for me. I'm not going to be one of these people that are here for 25 years, because I just knew in my personality, because I already am, work is the thing I do until my brain gets too tired to do anymore. It's just the way that some people are wired. And I could see even then that wasn't going to be a good long-term sort of thing that I could do, actually.
Yeah, and I want to kind of not necessarily backtrack, but put a caveat into what I'm saying, because I don't want to have it come across that this is easy to do. And it wasn't easy for me, but it was easier because I'm in a position where I have some flexibility. I'm working from home. If in between meetings I need to go for a walk, I go for a walk, not everybody is in that position. And so there may be stressors, whether it's work or you're taking care of small kids, where you can't fit in that time right there and then. So other things uh, that probably have seeped into my day-to-day life is in that we were uh, trained to do is have like some sort of self-care list or toolbox, and there'll be times when I feel alone, and a lot of times when you feel alone, you want to feel alone, like it's kind of,
Yeah.
and but I will try to do something what's called opposite action. And I would text a friend, or maybe go out for a walk and be around people, and or make even if somebody I can't connect with right away, but make a uh, see if I can make a coffee date or a lunch date or a dinner date with somebody. And so it's 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 fighting, like, it's not that you stop having that urge, because it's probably going to come, but seeing what you can do. And it's kind of that stress, like, okay, I know I'm going to be stressed by the commute home, so what can I do? One thing for me, I noticed, this is very personal, like I liked listening to music in the car, but I would spend so much time going through the different radio stations to find a song I liked, and that would actually be stressful for me. So I just stopped listening to the radio and just listened to music on my phone when I'm like through the car. So then I know it's all songs I like. If I'm not feeling like that song, I can forward it to another one and that's made a big difference.
Yeah.
Uh, and other things like long car rides is, identifying those triggers is probably, and they can be all individual and different, but identifying those triggers, building that awareness, then you can start to look at strategies. Okay, I'm not going to avoid that trigger, but how can I minimize that? Can I, before I go on that 12-hour car ride family vacation, what's the plan? Um, how often are we going to stop? Can I, pack the car, then take a break before getting in the car and driving, instead of having it like throw everything in the car, um, and then throw everybody in the car and jump in and go.
Even the way you say that sounds chaotic and oh my goodness. But no, I appreciate what you're saying. I really liked what you said about the self-care toolbox, because I feel like, there are these, people will often read strategies with which they can help unwind, de-stress both in the moment and also sort of later on. But sometimes they are things which are just completely impossible for that person, like they literally cannot get out for a 10-minute walk, or there's no way that they can go and sit in a sauna. Sorry, I don't have 20 minutes to sit in a sauna, or access to something like that. But if you're able to write down a whole, like just collate a list of things as simple as texting a friend to as expensive as going and having a float, I don't know, in one of those float tanks, but they're hopefully in the moment, there will actually be something that you can do, so it doesn't feel like, well, I can't go and have a float now, so my whole day's ruined.
Yeah, so it can be like, it can be quite simple, as you that depending on the service. So on my list, have a piece of chocolate.
Yeah, nice.
Right. And
just one though, right? I mean,
yes, no, I don't
go. Just kidding.
Yeah, but doing something that makes you feel better in the moment. For others, it could be like thinking of a happy memory. that gets you through it. Maybe it's chewing some gum, or if you can, putting on some music and listening to a song, or even one of those like white noise apps where you're listening to the rain or something like that.
Yeah. I like the press ups and squats as well, just for a change in your physical
Yeah.
state. Yeah.
Yeah. And those, so that idea of taking that physical break, and so not me, but exercise scientists have coined it as an exercise snack. And
Yes.
so you're snacking activity, and the idea, it's only like a minute to 2 minutes. And some of the, like, this has been ingrained into a lot of creative writers' day. So there's some interviews with Dan Brown, who, yeah, and he like, I've heard this in multiple interviews, different interviews, where he says that he programs his computer to lock every hour for a couple minutes to force him to stop writing. He says he doesn't leave his office. He just gets down on the floor, does some push-ups and sit-ups. And that little break gives him a boost of creativity to go for the next bit. And other writers will talk about getting outside, going to nature, like getting away from the writing and coming back, and all this jumble in your head all of a sudden starts to fill neatly just by removing yourself from the situation. So yeah, and depending on your situation working, can you do squats or jumping jacks or something like that beside your desk? Or yeah.
Yeah. Nice, Scott. Has your experience informed any of your research work, like your in-health behavior, and yeah, have you sort of given it, or is that just one step too far and actually no?
No, I would say so. Like, even with my blog writing, you could probably see a trend. Not that I'm suggesting anybody go back and read 6 years of my blog writing, but you can see a trend that as I started to not feel so great, started feeling worse, what I was writing about, I was writing more about mental health, writing more about exercise and mental health. I was looking into that. And it has had some effect, like not so much like physical activity and mental health. Like, I'm definitely reading more in that area, but my day-to-day research there, I've had a shift in interest from the physical benefits of activity, which I'm still interested in, to looking at like the mental, the cognitive types, like even that, taking that physical activity break can help you be more productive in what you're doing, can enhance creativity, can it prevent cognitive decline and dementia later in life. And so there's interest in looking at some of those aspects. And is it something I'm interested in? Is there a difference between going for your run on your regular running route, which you could probably think about other things while doing that, and it's great activity, as opposed to, let's say, going playing tennis or going playing basketball, where it's physically demanding, but also has a mental demand as well that's different from running your regular running route around your neighborhood. Just like if sitting can be detrimental, but does sitting, writing, writing something, doing some creative writing or research writing or writing a report, is that different than, let's say, sitting as a clerk in a grocery store or sitting as a parking attendant in a parkade, where both people are sitting, but the mental load or the mental challenge is different?
Yeah, for sure. And when you say that, I'm thinking back to, there's a show, Better Call Saul, and there was the parking attendant, which wasn't really a parking attendant, was he? He was more of a, worked for the mafia. But he would do crosswords. That was a good way to keep his brain active. Scott, do you know, I had, as you said in your email to me, Mikki, we've only got an hour. This is quite a long list. We've managed to sort of chat about one's topic and haven't even really moved on to the research stuff, which I'm really also interested to chat to you about. So hopefully we can save that for another time. Can you give us tell listeners where they can find your writing and of course your podcast as well? So you're very prolific on with the airways and writing as well. It's super impressive. Can you just tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, certainly. So my blog is drscottlear.com. And then I co-host a podcast with a former undergraduate student who's in my second year course who approached me on it. It's called How to Health, and that's available Spotify, Apple, Google platforms. And I'm also, varying levels of activeness on Twitter, Instagram. I have a TikTok account, and it's all at Dr. Yeah, I don't do funny TikToks, so
okay.
I'm not dancing or anything, and they're all at Dr. Scott Lear. Yeah.
That is awesome, Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me about this. I find it's really valuable, I think, for people to hear personal stories and how people have sort of the tools and strategies that people have used to help overcome that sort of aspect. But also just, I think because you're so open about it, I think that's really super helpful as well. So we will pop links to your channels, including TikTok, in the show notes, and hopefully it's fine for me to touch base and we can chat about your research on another occasion.
Oh, certainly. And thanks so much, Mikki, for giving me the space and opportunity to share as well. It's it can be, as I said, when also you share things, like it's not always easy and there are different barriers and challenges. But most times when people do share what's really going on inside, they feel better afterwards.
Yeah, no, I agree. So thank you so much, Scott.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, team, hopefully you enjoyed that. And in fact, I had a number of topics I wanted to talk to Scott about, but we didn't really get past this first one because that's what happens. Time flies when you have a conversation like that. So I'm really hoping to get him on to chat more about his research in the heart health and his own personal sort of journey there. Next week on the podcast, I have returning fan favourite, Dr. Dan Plews, and we talk about his training, we talk about Chelsea Sodaro's training, and what Dan's interested in right now. So be sure to tune in next week. But until then, though, you can catch me over on Instagram, Thread, and Twitter at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website, mikkiwilliden.com, book a one-on-one call with me. All right, team, you have a fantastic week. See you later.